Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Unlock the Middle. I am your co-host, Dean Packard, the proud principal of Charlton Middle School, and I have alongside of me my good friend and colleague, Principal Chris Starcheski of the mighty Titan Dudley Middle School in Dudley, Massachusetts. As you know, every Sunday night we bring to you some amazing guests when we start to look into some amazing things with education. Tonight, we're not going to disappoint. Remember, we're on live at YouTube, Periscope, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have a live stream going tonight where you can put your comments in and we can address them as we move forward. Principal Starcheski, it's Sunday evening. I hope you're as fired up as I am.
So fired up, Dean. This pencil would be no match for me if I wanted to take it down. Ready to tackle the week ahead after a nice weekend of relaxation with the kids and the family, hanging around the house today. Good baseball game yesterday. Got to find ways to relax and feed the soul a little bit as we tackle week upon week as we try to enter into a new world of education.
Well, I'll tell you what, that new world is almost becoming familiar. And that's what I kind of like. And that kind of leads us to where the mindset is today. You know, we often talk about growth mindset. And we talk about putting, leaders and educators in positions where they've got to try something different. Tonight's topic is going to take us down that alley, and we're going to really dig into reimagining what schools could be like, if we can make changes.
It's an exciting idea that is fraught with excuses about why not to pursue. And, we've been talking about it for a number of years. We're in 2020, Dean, and not all classrooms, and certainly not in your school and my school at Charlton Middle and Dudley Middle School, but a lot of classrooms still have a very much industrialized model of teaching and learning that's out there. And in order to get kids prepared for tomorrow's workforce, tomorrow's experiences, we got to start to shift a little bit. And I think we've done a pretty good job at that. We're not there yet, but great efforts by our educators in our buildings to move us forward, to move our students forward. And, we still have a good ways to go, but we've got the right mindset of the educators in our building to be able to take us to that next step.
Well, we've definitely taken 3 or 4 steps in that right direction, and giving teachers permission to take those steps is the biggest thing we have to do as leaders. And I'll tell you what I see when I'm walking through classrooms and I'm watching remote learning. I'm not even going to call it remote learning. Let's call it learning, interaction, engagement, kids asking questions, teachers flipping the classroom, teachers allowing kids to have a student voice. It's happening. It's happening a lot. And I can't wait to see what that looks like when we transfer back into hybrid. But I'll tell you what, we got a rock star with us tonight. And I think it's time to kind of bring him in and let's try to get his perspective on how to make all this make sense.
Absolutely. I'm on it, Dean. Dr. Greg Goins. As a professor, podcaster, and former school superintendent, Dr. Goins has emerged as one of the nation's leading voices on visionary leadership and the path to transforming our schools. He currently serves as the director of the Educational Leadership Program at Georgetown College in Kentucky, and previously spent 15 years as a school district superintendent in Illinois. As the host of the nationally acclaimed Reimagining Schools podcast, Dr. Goins has interviewed some of the world's most notable thought leaders on education reform, including Pasi Sahlberg, Alfie Kohn, Mark Prensky, Tony Wagner, Yang Zhao, Ian Jukes, Ted Fujimoto, William Richardson, and Ted Dintersmith. The Reimagining Schools podcast is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, EPN, and is also part of Canada's Voice Ed Radio, a 24/7 internet-based radio station dedicated to deepening the conversation with hashtag Reimagine Schools. Follow Dr. Goins on Twitter at Dr. Greg Goins, and he's got a website, www.reimagineschools.net, I believe. How are you, Dr. Goins?
I'm great, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your show and looking forward to having a really engaging conversation tonight.
Well, Dr. Goins, it's great that we have you with us tonight. And I'll tell you, as we enter into this school year, the timing of this type of conversation couldn't be any better. We're ripe for growth. We're ripe for trying new things, innovation, creativity within the classroom. Our teachers are now doing things that they've never done before, not only because they've been forced to do this, but because they need to do this to make education meaningful for all kids. And that's going to kind of lead us right into the conversation we're going to have tonight.
Yeah, if there's ever been a time to step out of your comfort zone, unfortunately it took a pandemic to do it. But anyone that was resisting change via technology, has had a very rude awakening over this time period. But I really think it's made all of us better. And I think we're stronger together as we work toward this new model of instruction. And I think we got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but I'm seeing schools that are really, rocking it on the remote learning side. And a lot of folks are going back to school now face-to-face here in Kentucky or in some kind of hybrid model. And I think it's just going to make the learning stronger.
I tell you what, we're right in that same wheelhouse, because we're coming back to hybrid starting in a week and a half, a week from next Thursday. We've been full remote right now, and hopefully the transformation process can get right back to face sometime by January if things go well. That's what we're really hoping for. But let's talk a little bit, if we could, just about your Reimagining Schools book. That really intrigues me, because I need to get into that a little bit and figure out what it's all about. How does it pertain to the growth of schools today?
Well, I've been doing the podcast now for the last 3 years, and I'm a huge fan of people like Ted Dintersmith, who was executive producer of Most Likely to Succeed, and he was actually one of the first guests that I had on my podcast. And I just really bought into this idea that you guys were talking about the industrial model earlier. And I tell people all the time that if schools look anything like they did when I was a student during the 1970s and the early 80s when I graduated high school, we're really cheating kids out of an opportunity for, preparing them for their future. And I often tell people, are we preparing kids for their future or our past as adults? So we have to shift our thinking, because this is a different time, and kids want and deserve a different learning experience than their parents and grandparents had. I'm a second generation school superintendent, so education's been the family business, so to speak. And I spent a lot of time as a school superintendent trying to figure out, what can we do to create better schools for kids? And now I'm working in higher ed, and that's just become this tremendous passion for me. I like to bring people on my show and just tell stories and try to stay out of the way and learn as much as I can. So really this whole project with the podcast has been about my personal growth, still learning at age 53 and trying to figure out what I can do to shine a light on best practices in K-12 education.
Man, Greg, as I listen to you talk, I'm harking back to, you've had Yang Chow on as a guest, and back in 2009, when Catching Up or Leading the Way came out, we had Yang Chow come to Shrewsbury High School as a distinguished lecturer for educators. And we started talking about the state of public education today back in 2009. And it's kind of curious that now we're in 2020 talking about a very similar state of public education that he was discussing with us back in 2009. So I'm wondering about your perspectives that you can open some doors on in terms of public education today. What do you see as next steps? What do you see as current practices and recommendations for a shift?
Well, I think we have to begin with agreement that there are some problems fundamentally, systematically in K-12 education. Now, that's not to say that there aren't great teachers out there doing great work every day. Teachers are heroes. There's no doubt about it. We have great school leaders like the two of you that are doing the things that need to happen to move schools forward. But if you look holistically, for far too long, we've been stuck in this old traditional model, and things really haven't changed a whole lot over the last, say, 140 years. So you walk into a lot of schools and it still looks the same way. As I said, when I was a student, many years ago, students sitting in straight rows, very much teacher directed, kind of a command and control type of mentality, with teachers in the building. And, we have to shift our mindset. We have to move to a more student-centered concept. We have to put kids in a position to become problem solvers and to use some of those soft skills, be more collaborative and learn how to communicate more effectively and just solve problems and find things that they're passionate about. And, kids doing seat work all day and doing worksheets. And, whenever we get fixated on grades and homework and those kind of things, they're just so counterproductive to what we should be doing in our schools. And so we have a lot of work to do, but I think you have to begin with the why. And, you have to get people in your building really having the conversation about what are best practices today in the 21st century to really move the needle and really make some significant changes. And that's hard to do, as you guys know, but that's the work that we need to focus on right now.
Well, problem solving is probably the key ingredient to helping kids really navigate through multi-curriculum. It's they can go across the board with problem solving, and PBL is something that we've really subscribed to in our district. And again, we start talking about trying to envision what the future is going to look like. In public education, we get so caught up with the now, and the now kind of stops us from being able to grow at the pace and at the rate that we need to grow. And not only that, when you stop stepping back and looking, what does that future look like? Having that open conversation with teachers, with parents, with kids, with community members, only then can you really begin to grow. So thinking about that, the future of education, talk to me about what you think is going to be coming down the road as we continue to go down this, talking about this reimagining schools.
Well, I think the first shift, like I said, we have to focus on a student-centered classroom environment, and we have to meet their needs. And I'm a huge believer in the deeper learning concept, and there are a lot of different ways that you get there. But you mentioned project-based learning. I'm a huge advocate for project-based learning as well as blended learning. But if you look at the workforce today, it's really a team sport. And if you go into a job, you're going to be put on a team. You're going to be asked to work with other people. You're going to have some team building skills. But most importantly, you're going to have to collaborate and problem solve. So this idea that kids are going to sit at their desk and do individual work, and it's about memorization and retention for the test that's coming up on Friday, we're not serving those kids well, because we have to make our schools look more like the real world. And that includes not only the work that they're going to be doing, but the way our classrooms look and the language we use and the attitude that we have about their growth as productive citizens. So again, we have a lot of work to do, but I think there's a lot of great opportunity if we would just take the time and have some really hard conversations about what we're doing. I think about design thinking, and I had Alyssa Gallagher is an educator in California, has a great book on design thinking for schools. And when I talked with her, she said, start by making a bug list. Just walk around your building with a notepad and a pen and make a list of all the things that bug you. And after you compile that list, then you start tackling those one at a time and having some deep conversations with the folks in your building about why we're doing these things and why we need to change them. And then from there, you start to build a little bit of momentum, and you can start making some change happen. But change is difficult, change is scary, but I think it's too important of a conversation not to have, because our kids really deserve it.
Greg, you just hit on it. Well, you kind of may have covered what I was hoping to discuss next. But, as I start to think about change is hard, and I start to think about, getting kids into that team mindset, tackling some of those things that may bother us, such as the power of the zero and, accountability learning as opposed to learning for, continuous improvement and connection. You've been a school superintendent for 15 years, which is quite a tenure as a school superintendent in this day and age, as you well know. The transformation process can go fast in some respects. It can go really slowly in others. What advice or recommendations do you have for shifting the mindset of not only a school, but a district, pre-K through 12? What are some tips and tricks to get everybody on the same page, moving in that same direction?
Well, and that's a great question. And we all kind of struggle with that. But it really comes down to having the courage to lead change and to have those hard discussions. People are fearful of change because they're always worried about how it's going to impact them. And it's not that people aren't, willing to talk about changing the way we're doing things. They're just very possessive about their classroom and how things are going to operate maybe in their wing of the building. I think the worst approach, and I suffered early in my career from this, is a very top-down heavy approach. It's very easy for me as a superintendent to send out an email district-wide and say, hey, everyone, I just saw this great video on flexible seating, and we're going to try this. Everyone watch this, and we're going to get together and talk about it on Friday. And then next week, we're going to start moving your desk out of your classroom. And, you're going to be met with a deep resistance. And when I recently talked to Posse Salberg, one of the things that really struck me was he said, the more we push for change, the harder the system fights back. And I think that was very well said, because people don't want, as a superintendent, me or you or anyone else, to impose my will on them because I think this is what we need to do. True change comes from the ground up. And I think that comes from having those meaningful conversations. Now, I've never been a big fan of forming committees because that has a very negative connotation with a lot of folks. But I do believe that you need to put together maybe an innovative cohort in your school or your district and sell it in a way that we need to do our research and discover best practices. Because if you're not a connected educator, if you're not on Twitter, if you're not following new book releases or watching YouTube videos and TED Talks, you don't know what you don't know. So it's our job as leaders to sit down and say, hey, do you know anything about project-based learning? Do you know much about blended learning? Do you know much about flexible seating? And just have those conversations. And then the momentum builds from the ground up. And then at the end of the day, you can say to your committee or to your innovation cohort, you know, we've reached a consensus. You guys did a wonderful job. And now we're going to roll something out next semester, maybe as a pilot project, so it's not as scary. And I also tell people when I was a superintendent, I always had 2 or 3 pilot projects going at one time. Everything was a work in progress. So you think about companies that are highly innovative, they all have research and development teams, and they're always trying to figure out what works. You know, schools need to have an R&D department, and it probably is going to fall on you as the principal. But we have to spend time researching best practices and having those conversations because, again, creating schools for kids is not for the faint of heart, but we need leaders that will step up and have the courage to do it.
Well, our R&D within the school system just made me smile because you know what? If we're going to grow, if we're going to reimagine, if we're going to recreate, we're going to rebuild, it's got to start, like you said, from the ground up. We used to have what we call team leaders. I switched it this year to my strategic innovation planning team, which is it's a start of a shift. It's a way to get people thinking differently than just the old connotation of just being a leader on your team. You're not just a leader. You are somebody who's got to come to the table every day and be reflective, have a growth mindset, and be ready to take on the challenges that we face. Education today is difficult. It's one of the most complex jobs that I know right now, given the pandemic that we're working through. But that being said, and we're talking about shifting mindset of a teacher. We've got the teacher is the warrior. The teacher is the person who makes it all happen. They come in every day. That's the grind. They're the ones who connect with kids. They formulate those relationships. Getting them to think outside the box and getting them to think that it's okay. It's okay to fail. It's okay to think differently about methodology. It's okay to think differently about assessment. How do you begin to make that shift happen? What are the seeds that you need to plant as leaders, administrators, whether you're building-based or district-wide, to allow teachers that freedom and flexibility to grow?
You know, I think the first conversation that I like to have with teachers is, first of all, if we go back to this bug list idea, I used to like to walk in and visit classrooms when I was a school administrator as a superintendent or a principal. And I tell people all the time, if you walk in the classroom and close your eyes, what voices do you hear the loudest? Is it the teacher or is it the kids? And if the teacher is dominating the conversation, if that's the voice that you hear the most, then that's the first red flag in my mind, because the role of the teacher has to change. It can no longer be this stand and deliver model, this lecture-based, I'm the only one in the room that has the knowledge and you're going to take notes. The reality is with technology, you're no longer the smartest person in the room. That little phone is. Siri knows more than I do. So, if the kids can easily Google the answer to a question, it wasn't a very good question to start with. So we have to rethink the role of the teacher, how we're going to ask questions, how we're going to put kids in that team-based approach, whether it be project-based learning or working in a makerspace type of environment. But let's let kids have some voice, let them have some choices as to what they're going to learn. And then the why, even for kids, is just as important as it is for adults, maybe more so. Explain to them why we're talking about this particular lesson or that lesson, and then be a facilitator and put them in a position to be leaders and collaborative and decision makers. And we always want to answer questions for kids instead of letting them fail. Let them fail. That's what kids are supposed to do. So, especially at the middle school level where you guys are, the more mistakes they make now, the better, in my opinion.
as I sit back and reflect again on the why, Dean and I, one of our first entries into the Videocast realm was hosting a little show on your why as an educator, and we didn't get to the level that you just honed in on, Greg, and that was really about the talking with the kids, specifically about the why of the learning, the why of the questions, the why of the structure to your classroom environment, getting them to understand why things may look different and not the same as their previous grade or their previous school. What is it that we want to achieve? What is it that we want to accomplish with them? And that said, the kids, that's why we do what we do, moving them forward. The future's in our hands. Based on your experience in the Ed Leadership Program and your past experience as a superintendent, what do you see as being the future that's in our hands? What do you see as necessary in the world of educator development, in the world of teaching and learning moving forward?
Well, obviously, we hear a lot about the 4 C's or essential skills or soft skills or however you want to phrase it. And I think that's probably overused. But I do think we need to put kids in a position, again, where adults are no longer standing over kids, helping them make decisions. We have to allow kids to organize some of their own projects, do some of their own problem solving, and work some things out for themselves. They're not always going to have an adult there with them to bail them out or to help them with some of these big decisions they're going to have to make throughout their lifetime. And the other piece of advice I would give teachers that are listening is, think about your classroom environment. And, I know we have teachers out there, and I know a lot personally, and my family even, they spend their own money out of their pocket to make their bulletin board look beautiful. And that's a great thing. But is that really what kids are going to focus on when they come into the classroom, how pretty your bulletin board is? I would rather you spend time, that first couple of days of school with a camera, taking pictures of your kids, letting kids bring photos from home, maybe getting some picture frames donated, and just make that a classroom environment that they want to come to every day. Kids want that classroom to feel like home. And there's nothing more homey than having pictures of yourself and your classmates surrounding the class, and just let the kids help decorate the classroom. It's their classroom as much as it is the teachers, if not more. So use a collaborative approach and do a co-design on the classroom and make it kid friendly, and do the things you need to do to get them excited about coming to school, because we have too many kids that can't wait to get on the school bus and go to school when they're in kindergarten, and kids you can't get out of bed when they're in 6th grade. So what's happened in that short period of time? We've sucked the creativity right out of these kids. So find a way to make school fun and exciting, and get them there and get them excited about whatever it is you're doing that day.
Greg, in my email that I put out to my staff today, my last line was, be that teacher that those kids want to come in and be in that room. And that can go in so many different directions. But that teacher is that teacher who values relationships before content. That teacher is that teacher who makes every child feel comfortable coming into their room. Hey, listen, I get it. When you got 100 kids on your roster, it's hard. And nobody ever said teaching is going to be easy. But at the end of the day, if you value connecting over delivering content, I think the content will come much easier down the road if kids feel welcomed and they want to learn in your classroom.
100%. And I tell people all the time, you're not teaching content, you're teaching kids. And kids are different. And if you have 25 kids in your room, they all have a different story. They all have something that they're worried about on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You've got to get to know these kids the best that you can on an individual level, know about their family, know about their friends. Every kid needs an IEP. And I know I get an eye roll once in a while when I say that, but what's wrong with having an individualized education plan for every student? Just like when you go to the doctor's office. I had a doctor's appointment the other day. They pulled up my chart on the iPad. Everything that he needs to know is right there in front of him or her. So we have to create those individual experiences for kids as well.
I love that. Hey, I want to throw one more thing, Chris, before you go, and I apologize. I got a little excited here because we didn't talk about it. And Greg, I think that you probably know a lot about this. Let's just walk in this park a little bit about assessment. How can, and I'm sorry we haven't gotten there, how can we change assessment to meet the needs of these innovative schools?
Well, it's just a complete shift in thinking, and we're still so locked into grades and who's on the honor roll and who's going to be the valedictorian and all this stuff about preparing kids for the college-bound experience. The truth is, a lot of kids aren't going to go to college, and so we have to prepare kids for whatever life is going to bring their way. And assessment needs to look differently. It's if you're doing project-based learning. It's just basically what evidence of learning is going to satisfy your appetite for their learning, and that looks a lot of different ways. I wish there was one answer, but you're starting to see more and more schools, move away from grading or maybe go into more of a standard-based grading policy.
Yep.
But don't focus on the grades so much. Focus on the learning, and then you can figure out what kind of exit slip at the end you want to use for assessment or how you want to determine the evidence for learning. But, traditional isn't always the best. And so think outside the box a little bit and try something new.
Having been a part of a middle school that transitioned to standards-based assessment, grading, and really feedback system, and still seeing tremendous success, I can tell you that it does work. It's not something we're diving into right now. So any DMS and CMS teachers who are out there, no worries. We're not going standards-based report card on you today. But the idea of identifying those real essential skills and those power standards that we really want to focus on and go cross experience with is absolutely key. And I appreciate the perspective that you brought to that, Greg. It's good to know that, past practice, best experiences are still similar. We just have to work on that mind shift and get rolling with the reimagination of schools.
The one thing that really drives us in the direction that we've gone is the state mandated testing. And listen, I get that. And that has taken creativity right out of the toolbox for teachers. You've got to get through every standard. You got to get to this finish line. You got to cover everything. And that takes the fun out of learning as well. And it's too bad because you know what, getting back to that standards-based approach, I do think you'd be able to look at the child holistically. You'd be able to see them grow, the feedback part of that. And you know what? My grade isn't a number, and there's not equity in every number that you get for a grade out there. And that's something we have to really look at, because an 89 on this team, you could get a 78 on the other team, and it's not the same. So again, when you dig down deeper into assessment, you get that pause, you get that feedback instead of that number, maybe things will start to change.
Right? And every year I was a superintendent, I stood up in front of my staff and all the teachers as we convened for a new school year. And I always said, I'm really not concerned about standardized test scores. I'm not. I know that's not what I'm supposed to say. And it's, people are, again, I'm going to get the eye roll. What I'm concerned about is, are we making continuous improvement each year? Are we getting better? So if you think about going from good to great, what's it going to take for us to make strides in whatever area that we need to move forward? So there's just way too much pressure and way too much, way too many people put too much stock into those standardized tests. And we're on the same page. I'm preaching to the choir. But focus on you and focus on doing the best you can to improve day in and day out in your school and your classroom.
The idea of being better every day is something that drives us pretty hard at Dudley Charlton, Greg, and it's certainly something that our teachers have embraced. We don't want to be status quo. We want to be better. We want to keep hungry. We want to keep moving the kids forward. And your words are certainly great to our foundational message that we bring in every day. Well, hey, we're coming up on the end of our time, Greg. So I wanted to thank you on behalf of Dean for joining us for the Unlock the Middle videocast tonight on Reimagining Schools. You were a great resource and certainly a wealth of information. We look forward to maintaining contact with you moving forward. Everybody out there in Unlock the Middle land, it's Chris Starcheski on behalf of Dean Packard saying thanks for tuning in tonight. Be sure to check us out on Tuesday night for our Middle Marvels segment coming at you with a local educator from Massachusetts who is turning into quite the pirate rock star. We look forward to seeing you all very soon. Follow us on Twitter. Check us out. And check out our stream. We've got some great guests, past guests who continue to share things and tag us. Wealth of resources and information. Expand your PLN. Have a great night, everyone.
Stay on, Greg.